We still have a democracy. It's good for now. The judiciary is doing their job, which is amazing. As most of you probably already know, Judge Boasberg ruled that there's probable cause that the Trump administration is definitely in contempt of court. They are ignoring orders. This is something that we all know, and it's important that the judicial branch is willing to do their job. The problem is the executive branch is probably going to ignore that, since we've all seen them lie over and over again, whether that be lying in the Oval Office or lying during press conferences. It's just lies, lies, and more lies, because that is apparently what they think about our democracy now. Zero respect for it whatsoever. But we still do have a democracy for now, which is why we have to continue to fight for it and continue to speak up. And I'm also excited that the legislative branch, for the most part, is doing their job. A senator went down to El Salvador, not just any senator, but Abrego Garcia senator, representing his constituent as he should. And that's important. If your senator is not riding and dying, well, hopefully not dying, but if they're not your ride or die, then maybe it's time to get you a new senator. This is a message to all of the elected officials out there who are not doing what they need to be doing right now. This is an emergency moment. This should be an all hands on deck. I get it. It's the break, but no, it's not, because democracy is about to break. I am frustrated, and the entire world is watching, which is why I think it's important that we check in with the rest of the world. And so, for my guest tonight, I decided to bring in a disinformation expert who happens to also be a good friend of mine, who also has happened to live in Argentina at the same time I lived in Argentina, and now lives in Spain, two places that are pretty familiar with dictatorships as well as disinformation. And so I think it's important to check in and find out they survived dictatorships. If we're going to have to do that, maybe we have something that we can learn from them. So without further ado, let me bring in my good friend, Adrian Bono.
Hey, Maya.
Hi, Adrian. How are you?
I am very good. I am so happy to see you.
I am so happy to see you too. Now, you are the founder of The Bubble, originally The Bubble Argentina, now The Bubble Spain. Can you talk about why it's called The Bubble, and what the purpose of the newsletter, which is now on Substack, is?
Sure. So originally, when we launched The Bubble in Argentina in 2012, the goal it's an English language publication. So the goal was to target foreigners, not just expats. I don't like that word, but immigrants or people who moved to Argentina, who didn't speak Spanish, who didn't understand what was happening, who couldn't read the newspapers, and were, because of that, living in some sort of bubble, right? The expat bubble, immigrant bubble, whatever you want to call it. So my goal was always to help them understand what was happening in the local culture, politics, economy, etc., so that they could integrate. That's always been the goal. So it's called The Bubble because we just wanted to make sure that people knew that there was this bubble that they needed to get out of. But little did we know that in a few years, we would start listening to this new concept that was called the filter bubble, because of how social media was polarizing everyone, and how it was important to get out of your media bubble, your social media bubble, and talk to people who disagree with you, rather than just read information that sort of like confirmed your beliefs. And now, when we shut down in Argentina because of the pandemic, and then I moved to Spain, and we've decided to launch it here now. So we're doing pretty much the same thing, and we're targeting. It's also in English. We're targeting the same communities. Spain has a much bigger English-speaking community. Spain is kind of like the Florida of Europe. So everyone, when they retire, when they decide to move to warmer weather, they move to Spain. So it's important that those people who are living here, they understand what's happening here, because otherwise if they don't speak Spanish, they don't know what's happening politically, economically, and these days you got to be informed.
No, absolutely. And I'm glad that you define immigrant versus expat as being something very different. I always
Yeah.
said when I was in Argentina, I was like, I'm not an expat. I'm a permanent resident. I've been here. I'm plugged in. I know what's happening because it is very easy to exist in a bubble. And the US, like Americans, for the most part, have gotten away with existing in a bubble, not really thinking about what's happening outside. Can you talk a little
Yeah.
bit about what is happening in Spain right now? And because we're selfish, I want to know what Spain's thinking about the U.S. right now.
Whew. So the sentiment is, I would say that most people are shocked and disappointed. I think that fortunately, and this not only happens in Spain, but it happens everywhere. I think everywhere in Europe. I wouldn't say that people are hating on the U.S., but they are really, really disliking the Trump administration with cause, right? Um, Obviously there's a small percentage of people who vote certain political parties that are aligned with Trump and the Republican Party in the US. Some people call it the international right or the international far right. Those people do still support Trump because they see that what he's doing there, politicians should be doing here. But I would say that most, at least Spaniards, are sympathetic with what's happening in the US, as you guys are trying to navigate the Trump administration.
When you say they want, they like what Trump is doing, those who are aligned with him, are you talking about the deportations, or are you talking about his stance on immigrants in general,
Yeah,
economy?
I think it's those two things. It's economy and it's immigration. So I would say that most people who support Trump in Spain and in Europe have a negative view of the EU. These are people who don't like to be dictated, as they say, dictated what to do. They don't like things like the green deals. They are not really in favor of passing laws that are conscious of the effects of climate change. I would say that they're probably climate skeptics. And also they are very, very much anti-immigration. There's the far right party here in Spain. It's called Vox. They are very much aligned with Donald Trump. In fact, the Santiago Abascal, who's the leader of Vox, he regularly goes to the U.S. He went to Trump's inauguration, and he was there a few weeks ago, I think, for CPAC, which was a kind of like an embarrassing moment for him because I don't. I'll be honest with you. I don't think Trump knows who he is. And
I was like,
and
I like
Trump
this kind of juicy gossip.
and at some point Trump, he was reading the teleprompter, and Abascal was in the audience, and Trump thanked him. And again, his name is Santiago Abascal, and Trump thanked him and called him San Diego Obascal, which which is, you can imagine, and it's also really, it's sorry Abascal, but like it's pathetic because he just like he stood up and he's kind of like, he bowed. Dude, he just called you San Diego, right? He didn't call you Santiago, which is your name. And he still bowed and thanked him. And he was like, touching his heart. And that clip, they played it over and over and over here in Spanish television because everyone's like, dude, what are you doing? Like, this is very embarrassing. But Vox is a party that is very much aligned with Trump on immigration. And he also has this view that Europe has been overpowered by the woke and needs to be moved to the right. And I think that at the end of the day, that's why Abascal continues to be supportive of him, even though tariffs are definitely going to affect farmers. And he's always catering to farmers because he says that his party is the only one that is going to bring back jobs and get and make the economy better. So there's a cognitive dissonance there that I don't even know how that works. But he's been kind of like tiptoeing because he doesn't know what to say when they ask him, how can you defend Trump when it's against your own policies?
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of that here, and the cognitive dissonance is wild. So in Spain, Are the vast majority of people, though, looking at this far right party and going, "This is not for us"? Because Spain is generally fairly liberal, from what I understand, socially
Yes,
at least,
yes.
and it's a lot of expats, or not expats. A lot of Americans are looking at it as a place to escape to. There are a lot of people who are looking at Spain as a backup country, and so I
Yes.
want to talk about this
You
idea
know,
that, yeah.
anecdotally, because and this is based on my personal experience, but you have no idea how many friends in the US have written to me in the last 6 months asking how they can move to Spain. It's sad in a way, um, but it's happening. You know, friends in San Francisco, New York, DC. These are people who are able to work remotely. So they are considering the possibility of moving here because Spain has now passed recently a digital nomad law that allows people to move here and work here and live here legally while you work for a company outside of Spain. And then there's a few other visas, like the non-lucrative visa for people who want to just come here and live here legally for a year, and then you can renew that every year, and you can stay for as long as you want, as long as you have private health insurance. So
So are these
people are
so
just
these people are escaping, the friends that are asking, are they escaping, hoping to escape fascism? What is
yes.
the Okay.
There's I'd say there's, they're doing it for different reasons. There's people who say I just don't like the vibe in the US right now. I don't like the polarization that exists there, and trust me, there's polarization here in Spain. But these are people who say I just don't feel comfortable living in this society right now. I don't live comfortable under Trump. I don't want to continue living in a country where we're increasingly hating each other, and I don't know where this ends. There's people who are part of the LGBTQ community who feel like their rights are increasingly under threat. And right now, Spain is one of the most LGBTQ friendly countries in the world, right? So there's many reasons why they're thinking of coming here, and because of my job and because of the publication that we have, I have a lot of information on how to move to Spain if you want to. So they come to me because they want to get that information, and also we see it in like polls and all sorts of reports from the EU about the increase in either visa requests or inquiries about how to legally become a resident in Spain or any other country in the EU, so they can move to Spain. There's actually people who are even thinking of or trying to get Italian nationalities or like an Italian passport or a Spanish passport from their great grandparents, so that they can come here legally rather than having to get a visa. I have a really good friend from the US who got I think it's his great grandfather who was a Italian, and he got the passport so that he could move to Spain. So it's really sad to see how many people are thinking of moving here now because of what's happening there politically, when maybe like 30 40 years ago it was the opposite, right? The US was the country that everybody wanted to move to, and now it's just completely turned around.
Yeah, and that's part of what I wanted to talk about is the vigilance that is required to maintain a democracy. Because if democracy in the US falls, I mean, everybody scatters to different
Yeah.
places as opposed to fighting it. What do you see for the future of Spain? Do these fascist parties have a future in Spain? Are they growing, or are they still very much on the fringe?
It's a great question, and I think that we, like all journalists here, are trying to see where this goes. So far, fortunately, I would say in the last 10 years since these movements appeared, they seem to have hit a ceiling for now. Right now, there's two far right parties. The most popular one is Vox, and I think they're polling at 14%. which I think it's 14.1%, which is relatively low. And then there's another one that's, I don't even know how to qualify this. It's called the Party's Over Party.
I'm sorry,
Se acabó
what?
la fiesta. In Spanish, it's called Se acabó la fiesta, right? And that translation would be the party's over party, right? And they call themselves the Party's Over because they say that they come here to drain the swamp and to kick all of the politicians out and restore whatever it is they think that they're going to restore. They are definitely fringe. They are led by this guy that's called Alvise Perez, who just appeared on the national stage out of nowhere a couple of years ago, and he's basically anti-system. And Vox is upset because they are stealing votes from them. So there's somewhat of an infighting and competition between them. And this guy, the Alvise Perez, he basically he shaped his party, and he got most of the people who joined his party through a Telegram channel. That's the power of social media, right? And he spreads a lot of disinformation all the time. He's actually now the Supreme Court of Spain has launched an investigation. I think they're going to indict him for spreading. A couple of years ago, he published a positive COVID test from a minister in Spain who had been the test was fake. He had tampered with it, and he had changed the information there. So now he's in legal trouble because of that.
Wow, and he's also the leader of a not party.
Yes, correct. Yeah. but going back to your original question as to how much these parties are growing, for years they've been somewhat between 13 and 17. I think we should start worrying when they reach 20%. Right now, Vox by itself is not able to become government because they don't have the votes. But right now in Spain, we have a coalition government led by the socialists, who are center left. But if the PP, the Partido Popular, which is center right, if they win the elections, they also don't have enough votes to govern, and they need to create a coalition with Vox. And Vox has been very clear about the fact that if they become government with them, they're going to basically ask for a lot if they want their votes. So we're just waiting that it doesn't come to that, because the PP is going to have to give in to a lot of Vox's demands.
Well, and it sounds like it's like sort of MAGA light, trying to have, which is actually pretty impressive that you are able to work across multiple aisles, it seems, in Europe, that multiple parties have to come together. I can't see anything like that happening in the US. And people in the US are rightfully upset. Democrats are rightfully upset about being expected to somehow work with a party that is out and out more and more fascist every day. There were protests, as you know, recently. There's going to be protests again this weekend. And when we were in Argentina, protests were a part of life.
Yeah. When wasn't there a protest, right?
And I think about that often. I actually brought my right here. I want. Can you?
Did you ever take part in a carcelazo? Did you?
Of course I did. Of course I did. I can't even remember what it was for. But guys, a carcelazo. I'll let Adrian explain. What is a carcelazo?
The cacerolazo in Argentina became sort of like the way to protest whenever there was massive discontent in the population. People would just like grab their pots and pans, and they would just go to the balcony and start banging them. And I think that the one that you took part on was probably the one in 2012, which was one of the biggest ones ever against Cristina Kirchner, who was then in power. But originally, the first time that they put this into practice was in the big economic crisis meltdown, I would say, of Argentina in 2001. That's when the first cacerolazo happened. And then it just became part of daily protests in Argentina. And I remember I spent 15 years in Buenos Aires. I remember I would leave for work, and this was a daily thing, right? I would leave for work not knowing if I was going to make it there, because there were roadblocks everywhere. There were protests and marches, and people were burning stuff down, and it's, it's kind of like an adventure, right? It's like, okay, I'm leaving the house, and I don't know what time I'm coming back. I don't even know if I'm coming back. Um, so yeah, it's Argentina has a I would say Latin America has a very, very strong protest culture, and that's very different from the U.S.
Yeah, so same. Everybody, you need to know that like it was an excuse. It was a perfectly acceptable excuse in Argentina to say that you are late to something porque
Yep.
hubo una manifestación. Perdóname, hubo una manifestación. Like there was a protest. Sorry, and everybody understood. Like, of course, that's why I would always take the soup day, unless there was a paro de soup day, which was a subway strike, which those happened fairly
That
often
also
as
happened
well.
all the time. And things have, I mean, things have changed now, because I think that the ones that we would always run into, the piquetes, right? Like, which in English you would call them picket lines.
Yeah.
And the piquetes were everywhere in Buenos Aires, and they were, especially if you lived outside of the city, if you lived in the suburbs and you had to commute, it was really hard because you were driving your car and maybe you were stuck like on the highway for 3 hours because suddenly there was a sudden piquete that just appeared out of nowhere. And with yes, and then Javier Milei, when Milei became president, that was one of his promises. He said, "I'm going to end this chaos," and he has surprisingly delivered on that.
Saying that you're going to end the protests is actually feels very, very anti-democratic. So let's talk about
Yes.
Milei, because
Ooh.
I think it's important for people to understand the connection between the fascism and dictatorship that has happened in Argentina, what's happened in Spain in the past, and in the US, which we're quite frankly not used to having to advocate and fight and bang pans for our rights. So yeah, because it's why this is the first I'm hearing of this actually. And piquetes are such a part of Argentine culture that the fact that
Totally.
Milei was able to make them go away.
Yeah.
Can you talk about just give people a
I
quick
think
yeah.
I think it was it's a combination of fear on the one end, because he said, one of the ways that Milei became president was because, we talk about it, it's like funny, anecdotal, but a lot of people, like working people, they were just tired of this. They were exhausted by having to leave the house and not knowing whether they were going to get to work. So while Argentina had 6 dictatorships in the 20th century, and that obviously left a very strong mark. And for years after the last dictatorship that ended in 1983, people were very, very anti mano dura, which is kind of like, being strict and following the law. And this is why there was this sort of like laissez-faire attitude towards the picket lines. But then it just got out of control, and it just went so far that people said, well, you know what? I think we want the police to once again, come here and say, either you get out or I'll remove you by force, which was something that was unthinkable maybe 15 years ago in Argentina. And that has changed a lot. The perception of the police and sort of like restoring order and law has changed. And I think that this is why.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I think that like this, and the fact that when Milei won, a lot of people were at least saying, "Let's give this guy a chance and see what happens." I think that that's what helped sort of like end the piquete culture, which I think slowly now is starting to come back because the situation is, it's not great.
Well, the idea of let's give this guy a chance sounds very familiar, as that's what a lot of people who
Yes.
are like, "Oh, this outsider Trump coming in, let's give him a chance and see what he does." And I
Yeah.
remember being in Argentina, and it's called fascist nostalgia. I think I learned that term from Anne Applebaum, where people would start to say things like, "Oh, it was safer." And it was generally, "Oh, it was safer during the dictatorship." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Safer for who?"
For who? Exactly. Yeah, yeah. That's and same thing happens in Spain. You would be surprised. There's a large number of people here who will say, things were safe, like streets were safer when Franco, the dictator, was alive, which is ridiculous because Spain is super safe. So I don't know what exactly they're talking about. I think it's more like safe for who. Um, but I disagree with some people who like to create this sort of comparison between Trump and Milei, um, who say that they are the same, uh, because they're on the opposite side of many things. And yes, you can establish several comparisons. I think that the whole outsider, uh, coming to sort of like change the status quo and all that. I understand that. But I think that the situation in Argentina was so different from the situation in the US. Argentina has been living in a constant state of crisis since all of us can remember.
Mhm.
And Argentina's economy has been doing really bad for at least 20 years now, or maybe not 20, but like 17 years, since like 2007, when things started going downhill.
Mm.
So people are tired, and there's now like a generation that's grown living in an economy crisis with an inflation that was 200 and something percent a year. It's just impossible to live in. And I think that maybe the Trump administration saw what Milei was able to do there and say, oh, maybe we should try that here. I just don't understand how you can compare that. I mean, the U.S. economy was when Biden left office, it was just in an incredible shape. I'm not saying that there's not people are not struggling in the U.S., because they clearly are, but you can't compare the U.S. economy to the Argentine economy. So the whole chainsaw thing, and it's like let's follow the Milei playbook in Argentina and apply it in the U.S. It makes no sense to me. I don't even know where they're trying to go with this.
Well, it makes no sense except for when you think about the perception of how people are doing. And for some MAGA, through disinformation, Trump was able to convince people that they're doing terribly, that there's crime everywhere,
Yep.
that
Yep.
everything's dangerous, and that mano dura that is, because that's exactly what Bukele is doing in El Salvador, to clean up the streets. Now, obviously, yes, there was a gang problem and a crime problem
Yeah.
but he cleaned it up, and then he stayed in office and he ran again, even though he wasn't supposed to, and just changed the Constitution. And so it feels like Trump is taking a page from all of these different dictators, and the people in the U.S., what I gather, don't have any sort of, it's not in their DNA, an understanding of fascism, an
Yep.
understanding of what it looks like.
Yep.
And to that end, I want to roll this clip that we have of Jon Stewart realizing that maybe he should have listened to the people who were screaming that it was about to get real fascist real fast. Sam, can you roll that?
Open to deporting individuals that aren't foreign aliens but are criminals to El Salvador. Does that include potentially U.S. citizens, fully naturalized immigrants?
If it's a homegrown criminal, I have no problem. I'm talking about really bad people. Really bad people.
He's going to do that to U.S. citizens. I think the hosts of The View are about to get administratively errored. I got to tell you, I did not think he would get this authoritarian this fast. I really didn't. I'm sorry. Who could have known? Maybe if somebody out there had yelled at me on Blue Sky about this, I would have known. But no one did. Except every day. In all caps.
It's funny, except for it's terrifying
Yeah.
that someone with such a huge platform who could have sounded the alarm didn't. What do you think, as somebody who has lived in two countries where fascism has taken root, where had taken root, that there were dictatorships, but people survived? Because I think what people in the U.S. Need right now, I think what everybody who's watching needs right now, is to know that it is possible to fight back against a dictatorship or a
Yeah.
potential dictatorship.
Yeah.
What would you say to Americans about what they can do right now?
Look, I think that the first thing that probably the US needs to, or like people in the US need to recognize, which I understand that it may be hard because you guys have been dealing with the concept of American exceptionalism for so long, right? Um, you guys are like above perfect. Um, and when you have been growing with that sentiment, it's really hard to admit that something is wrong. Um, there's a book, I don't remember the year or who wrote it. I think it's from the early 1940s. And it's called "It Couldn't Happen Here," and it talks about how the Third Reich or Hitler could never come to power in the U.S. Um, and it just reminds me of, I'm looking at articles these days. I open Instagram or go on the New York Times or the Atlantic, and I see a lot of headlines that are we heading towards authoritarianism? I think you guys are there already. And I understand that it's really hard to say, okay, we're there, but at some point you got to draw the line. I couldn't think of a more clear example than what's happening now. This is a constitutional crisis. You have Trump, who is in contempt. Apparently, he's going to be in contempt of the court. He's refusing to listen to what the Supreme Court is saying. What more evidence do you need? And I think that the first thing the first step towards fighting fascism and authoritarianism is recognizing that it's happening in your own country. I think that fortunately, if you guys decide to act now, then there are still some parts of democracy that are still functioning. You said it at the beginning of the podcast. We still have democracy. Yes, there's someone in power who's authoritarian, but you still have a democracy. And if you look at what's been happening in many other countries like Spain, or even Argentina more recently, it's very easy to look at those signs and realize that you guys are heading there too. So better to act now, to organize, and to find the ways to strengthen those parts of the government that are still working. I mean, the elections are still a year and a half away, but this can still be saved. I wouldn't say it's a very different situation from having a tank roll up to the White House and say, I'm president now. But there's still ways that you guys can organize and act to stop this. And I think that if you look at what's been happening in the last few weeks, there have been some minor wins. And I think that if you continue down that road, then we can do that. I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic. I don't think that the American people are going to let Trump continue to behave like this sort of king. I think that the American people doesn't like kings. So I'm optimistic about the future of the U.S. I just hope that you guys can enact that change in time.
I hope so too. That was some tough love from our Spanish bestie.
Sorry. But this comes from a great place. I love the US. I worked in the US. I studied in the US. I lived in the US. I want the US to do well. And I have so many friends in the US. So I think that it's better, tough love at this point. It's a lot better and more useful than just being like, oh, you guys are great. You're going to be okay. No, it's better to recognize what needs to change and what needs to be fixed so that you can do it. And sometimes you need someone to say that.
Thank you for saying that to us, Adrian. Yeah, it's hard. Uh, uh, Definitely. So I'm really actually so happy that we were able to have this conversation. This is, I think, our first face-to-face in, I don't know,
So excited.
a decade or so. So I
I
definitely
know.
want you to come back so we can continue to have these conversations and you can continue to give us this intervention that we so desperately need. Where can
Please.
people find you in the meantime?
Where can people find me? You can read The Bubble if you go to thebubble.com. We cover Spain every week. The most important, I would say current events, politics, economy, society, pop culture. As I said, we try to give you everything you need in order to feel like you're a part of Spanish culture, right? We don't want you to look at Spain from behind a plexiglass. We want you to feel like you're immersed. And we have this section in the newsletter that's called five things to discuss at dinner parties. And this is what we consider the five biggest stories of the week that and it could be like a TV show in Spain that people are going to be discussing, and we just give you all of the information and we give you explainers so that if you are at a dinner table and suddenly someone starts talking about it, you will have the basics so that you can become a part of that conversation as well.
I love
So-
this. People are going to need this in case we don't do the work that we need to. We all need to escape to Spain. So,
And we'll welcome you with open arms. We need people. So yes. In fact, I
Thanks.
don't know if you know, but like the Spanish economy was the best performing economy in 2024 in the world. And this is because the EU economy has been kind of like struggling, but Spain is the strongest economy in Europe right now, which is insane if you think about it. But that is because of immigrants. Many immigrants from Latin America have moved to Spain, and we need those people. So we need more immigrants. We need qualified workers, and we're more than happy to take as many people as we can, because I think that makes Spain stronger. So welcome.
I'm glad Spain is doing it right. Hopefully the US will remember that it is immigrants who get the job done again.
Yep.
So thank you so much for joining me, Adrian. I'll see you again sometime soon, I hope.
Hopefully. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Well, that's the tough love that we needed. Adrian just sat us down and said, "You're not so exceptional." And we know, like deep down in our heart of hearts, we know. And I think that's what an intervention is that coming, that come to Jesus moment, if you will, where we realize that we need to do the work. And the culture of protesting that happened in Argentina is part of one of the things that staved off fascism. And so we may not recognize it as quickly as we need to be recognizing it. And I'm glad that Jon Stewart opened up about the fact that perhaps he got it wrong. Perhaps he was wrong. Yes, Jon, you were wrong. But now that we are quite aware of the constitutional crisis that we are all witnessing, we can stop asking ourselves, is this authoritarianism? Is this tyranny? Yes, it is. No president is above the law. He is not a king. Checks and balances still matter. The Constitution matters. Due process matters. And so, what is the work that we have to do right now? We have to protest a lot. It has to become a part of our culture. It's not just a like, oh, here now. No, protesting. And that doesn't mean just like protesting in the streets, also about the way you consume. All right. So I think a lot of people are starting to talk about a general strike. And I personally think it's time to shut things down, because that's part of the reason why I was okay with the government shutdown, because when things shut down, people pay attention. When things shut down, people have to like go to the corner and think about what they did. Think about it. During the pandemic, we did a lot of reflection. During the pandemic, it was like, what are we doing with our lives? What are we like? That's for some people. Some people reflected. Other people got crazy and went down QAnon rabbit holes. But we can use this opportunity to decide what kind of America we want to have. And we do know that there are still more people who like democracy. They may not have participated And that's why we have to reach those folks who still may be thinking that everything's okay, because most of our elected officials are still acting like everything's okay. And a lot of our journalists are acting like everything is okay. And everything is not okay. It's not. And so we have to stop acting exceptional and admit that. And so push each other. Push your friends and family who are trying to ignore what's happening, and push the people with huge platforms like journalists to start asking the hard questions, because otherwise we're all going to end up in Spain. And I love Spain, to be honest, and hablo español, así que si quiero mudarme a España, voy a mudarme a España. Entonces, I've been Mayo May. This has been Punching Up. Thank you for watching. Lincoln Square Media has a ton of shows, and we're doing lives all the time now, so look out for those. You can follow me. In the meantime, Maya on Stage on all the platforms, including Substack, which every week I promise that I'm start posting on there, and this week will be the week.